The room was silent when J.D. Vance walked in. Students filled every seat, notebooks open, phones ready, eyes focused on the man who had become one of America's most talked about senators. He looked sharp, confident, dressed in a tailored blue suit with no tie. His smile was tight. He wasn't here to be liked, he was here to win. He started with charm, thanking the university, making jokes about student loans and cafeteria food. Laughter followed, polite but cautious. Then the tone shifted. JD leaned into the microphone and said, "Let's talk about performance. The kind you don't see on a stage but on your screens every night. Hollywood loves to pretend it understands the real world." He paced slowly, eyes locked on the audience. "Take Denzel Washington," he said. "Great actor, no doubt. But when he starts giving advice on family, discipline, faith, that's not a role. That's propaganda dressed as wisdom. These actors are not our teachers. They're state-approved distractions. Paid voices to keep you emotionally satisfied while nothing real changes." A few students frowned. Others typed faster. JD smirked. "You think these Oscar speeches are organic? Half the time, someone in Washington or New York scripts the themes. They make sure you stay focused on feelings instead of facts." He took a breath, then added, "You ever hear of a movie called Silent March? 1987. Denzel plays a soldier who turns against his country for moral reasons. Sounds noble, right? That film was part of a Department of Defense study on media influence. Look it up. It's not just art, it's instruction." It's when it happened. From the back of the room, a calm voice spoke. "Mr. Vance, may I respond?" The senator paused. The audience turned. An older man stood up, gray hair, glasses, tweed coat. Professor Charles Edwardson. His presence was known but never loud. He had taught here for decades, quietly shaping minds without fame. But in this moment, the air changed. JD nodded, still smiling, but his fingers gripped the podium. Professor Edwardson walked forward slowly. "I find it interesting, Senator, that you quote Silent March. Not many remember it. Fewer understand its purpose." He stopped at the front. The room was holding its breath. "There's a phrase. In your speech," Edwardson continued, "state-approved distractions. You use it freely, but do you know its origin?" JD didn't respond. "It came from a 1976 Pentagon memo on psychological operations. That memo was declassified in 2009, quietly, without much attention. You quoted it almost word for word. And you think Denzel Washington is the puppet?" JD tried to respond, but Edwardson raised a hand. "I taught here during the time Silent March was released. I remember the phone calls from anonymous numbers, the pressure from sponsors, the strange restrictions placed on certain faculty. That film rattled the wrong cages. It wasn't a tool, it was a warning." JD laughed softly. "With all due respect, Professor, maybe you've watched too many films." Edwardson stepped closer. "And maybe you've misunderstood the nature of power. Performance doesn't always mean fiction. Sometimes truth must be performed to survive." A hush swept across the room. No one knew what was happening exactly, but it felt bigger than a political debate. Edwardson turned to the audience. "Denzel Washington did not act to deceive you. He acted to protect what he knew the public wasn't ready to face." JD's smile faded. His posture shifted. It was small, but it was there. Professor Edwardson looked him straight in the eye. "The question, Senator, is not whether he was part of the system. The question is whether you are." And just for a second, the projector screen behind them flickered. A glitch, a symbol barely visible appeared for half a frame. A circle, with 3 lines through it. Somewhere in the room, a student looked up. She had seen that symbol before. But no one said anything. Not yet. The class ended in silence. JD Vance left the hall quickly, without shaking hands or taking questions. Cameras followed him only for a moment before turning back to Professor Edwardson, who stood quietly packing his notes. Students whispered. Some looked disturbed. Others looked like they had just seen the opening scene of a bigger story they didn't yet understand. That night, the clip went viral. It wasn't JD's lecture people shared, it was Edwardson's reply. Some called it the most calm takedown in academic history. Others focused on one strange detail: the glitch on the screen behind JD, a flicker symbol. A few online analysts slowed the video down frame by frame and posted screenshots. 3 lines through a circle. Old school Reddit threads picked it up. The forgotten Cold War intelligence forum resurfaced it. One user posted that's SIGIL3. It hasn't been seen since 1989. While the internet argued, something else was happening in the background. In Langley, Virginia, a senior CIA analyst named Marla Keene was called into an emergency meeting. Her supervisor didn't explain much. He just handed her a USB stick labeled Dormant Protocols, Ethergate. She was told to cross-reference recent academic public footage as if anything involving former agency-linked media from the 80s. One name had been flagged: Silent March. Another, Edwardson. Marla leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. This can't be happening again, she whispered. Meanwhile, Edwardson was walking alone through the quiet campus, his hands deep in the pockets of his overcoat. It was nearly midnight. He stopped near a fountain and looked up at the dark sky. He pulled out an old flip phone. Yes, a flip phone. No GPS, no cameras. He dialed a number from memory. A woman answered. You waited longer than expected, she said. They activated Sigil 3, he replied, in a lecture hall, in front of students. A pause. Who? Vance. He used Cold War phrasing. Too cleanly, too exact. He either knew what he was saying or he's been used by someone who does. We warned them decades ago, the woman replied. But they buried everything. No, they didn't bury it, Edwardson said. They recycled it. In the morning, J.D. Vance gave an interview to a political podcast. He laughed off the moment with Edwardson. It's called him one of those professors who confuses old movies with world history. He said Denzel's a good actor, but let's not pretend he's a threat to global stability. But that's not what worried the intelligence community. What worried them was why Sigil 3 appeared. In the original Cold War program, SIGIL 3 was an emergency broadcast watermark used in psychological warfare exercises. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a trigger. When inserted into public footage, it sent a signal to dormant listening stations, signaling that a buried protocol had been reactivated. Buried doesn't mean forgotten. Buried means waiting. And that same morning, buried systems lit up in 5 separate military installations. In an airbase outside Berlin, a classified terminal that hadn't pinged in 31 years suddenly displayed a message. S3X interlocutor contact pending. In Tokyo, a retired agent living under a new identity received a brown envelope at his doorstep. No return address. Inside, a screenshot from the lecture showing JD and the flickering sigil. And in New York, a quiet journalist named Madi Rever, formerly with The Atlantic, now running a small independent investigation blog, received a message from an encrypted sender. It simply read, "You were right about Silent March. Start." With Edwardson, Madi had spent the last 4 years chasing the connection between Cold War cinema and Pentagon psychological programs. She had always been brushed off until now. She dug through her files, pulled out a yellow folder marked SM, fictional or field test, and began cross-referencing everything. One page caught her attention again. Declassified 1993 memo project Opus Glass Objective. Assess behavioral influence through emotionally charged film narratives. Test subject public. Exposed via theatrical releases with embedded phraseology. It's a sample line used. Silent marches still make the loudest noise. And that's what JD had referenced. He had said something slightly different in the lecture. When actors like Denzel pretend their words are moral instruction, you forget. Silent marches are state-designed distractions. That variation wasn't random. It was reconstructed. Maddie whispered to herself that line was never public. Unless someone gave it to him. Her phone buzzed again. Same sender. A second message. There's something in Edwardson's past you've missed. He didn't just study propaganda. It's helped write it. And far away in a bunker beneath, Fort Meade NSA analysts watched their internal signal monitors go red. Not because of foreign interference. Not because of terror threats. But because someone somewhere had said the wrong phrase in front of the wrong camera to the right set of ears. It had begun again. Maddie Rivera hadn't slept. Her apartment was covered in files, printed transcripts, yellow folders, red marker highlights. Coffee cups sat half-finished next to stacks of old VHS screenshots and declassified documents. The phrase silent marches, our state-designed distractions, echoed in her head like a drumbeat. She stared at an image on her laptop screen. J.D. Vance frozen mid-speech, the moment his words flicked the background screen. The sigil burned faintly into a single frame, 3 lines through a circle. Most people watching live never saw it. But she did, and now she couldn't stop. She opened another file. The original script for Silent March, a Cold War-era political thriller. Denzel starred in during the early 90s. It was supposedly a fictional story about defectors and coded messages. But Maddie had long suspected it was more. The dialogue carried certain patterns, phrases used by intelligence handlers, not screenwriters. Then she saw it again, page 47 of the shooting script. Sometimes silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of control. Line had never made it into the final cut. It was scratched out in red ink. Someone had redacted a line in a fictional screenplay. Why? Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She picked up. A man's voice, steady but cold. Stop digging. You're closer than you know. Too close. Then he hung up. She froze. Not because of fear, but because whoever that was, he knew her number. It's her private one. Meanwhile, at Yale, Professor Charles Edwardson was staring at his office wall, where an old photograph hung. It showed him decades ago, young, in black and white, standing next to 3 men in suits. One of them had a blurred face. The caption read, Cultural Defense Initiative, 1984 Prague Cell. He took the photo down slowly, flipped it over, and removed a tiny metallic square glued behind the frame. It was a data wafer. Obsolete technology, but he had kept it. And now he knew it was time. He slid it into an ancient adapter on his desk. Connected to an air-gapped laptop. The screen flickered. CDI audio log. File number 209 subject. March protocol, a voice began to play his own, but younger, colder. Testing influence theory using cinematic narrative delivery. Subjects. Unaware. Mission critical phrase embedded in third act dialogue. Operation Silent March. To begin upon utterance and activation of SIG-IL-3. He stopped the recording, closed the laptop. He had kept his secret long enough. Later that evening, Edwardson wrote a single email to one recipient, Maddie Rivera. Subject: If you want the truth, meet me at room 41 Morris Library basement, Yale. Come alone. She arrived in the dark, wet from rain, hood over her head. The old library was silent except for the buzz of fluorescent lights. The basement smelled of dust and old memory. Room 41 was more of a storage vault, metal, cabinets, sealed crates. Edwardson was already there, sitting at a table, 3 feet of files stacked beside him. I expected you sooner, he said. I had to dodge a few ghosts, Maddie replied. Who's threatening me? Not who. What? He said. You're not chasing people. You're chasing a protocol. A program that never died. It just went quiet. She sat across from him. Silent March was never just a film, was it? He opened one of the boxes, pulled out a binder-stamped Archive D9. Inside were scripts, production notes, and memos from the Department of Defense, all referencing narrative calibration for social stabilization. They used us, he said, artists, writers, filmmakers, not just to entertain but to shape thought, control tension, build empathy when needed, destroy it when ordered. And Denzel. He was never part of the program, Edwardson said. That's what made him dangerous. He chose truth over comfort. He rewrote a scene in Silent March on the last day of filming. That's why it triggered Sigil 3 now. Vance accidentally quoted a line Denzel had changed, a line only original handlers knew. Maddie's eyes widened. So Vance, he's not the source. No, he's the signal. She stood up. Who's behind this reactivation? Edwardson slid over. A file. You won't like the answer. She opened it. Inside, a photo of a closed-door intelligence hearing. J.D. Vance was seated next to two unknown individuals, one of them marked with a red circle. Handwritten beneath it, D. Havar, NSIA, the National Strategic Influence Agency. Maddie asked. That's not even real. It wasn't, Edwardson said, until they made it real again. Suddenly there was a noise in the hall. Heavy footsteps, a voice through the intercom. Room 41, we need both of you to exit slowly. This is federal property now. Maddie's heart raced. Edwardson remained still. No sudden moves, the voice said. Maddie reached for her phone. No signal. Edwardson handed her a USB stick. Get out through the East Archives tunnel. Connects to the maintenance lot. Don't stop running. What about you? I've been waiting to finish this chapter for 30 years. You're the one who has to write the rest. Maddie hesitated. The door lock clicked. She bolted through the side hallway, clutching the drive. Behind her, room 41 went dark. And far above, in a nondescript Washington, D.C. office, a red dot blinked on a secure monitor. Status, exposure, partial, suppression, in progress. Maddie didn't stop running until the tunnel ended in the back lot behind the Yale Maintenance Building. Her legs ached, lungs burning from the cold night air. But she didn't stop. Rain poured over her jacket, hiding her face from passing security lights. She gripped the USB stick tightly in one hand like it was evidence from a murder scene, which, in a way, it was. The moment she got inside her car, she didn't start the engine. She crouched low, locked the doors, and pulled out her old emergency burner phone. She had 5 trusted contacts. Only 2 would answer after midnight. She called the second. Dr. Kelvin Marsh, Department of Digital Forensics. The tired voice answered. You've got 5 seconds before I hang up. It's Maddie. I need you. God, what did you get yourself into this time? A file from inside something? Buried, called Operation Silent March. Denzel, Washington. J.D. Vance. And something called NSIA. There was silence on the line. I'll text you an encrypted drop link, Kelvin said. Upload it, then disappear. I'll find you when I've seen it. She clicked the call off and tossed the burner into the glove box. She couldn't go home. She couldn't trust the cloud. The only place left was an old news colleague in Baltimore, someone who still believed in analog records and unlisted doorbells. Meanwhile, in D.C., inside a soundproof government room without windows, 3 men sat around a table under cold white light. Professor Edwardson is secured. One of them asked. He refused extraction. Deliberately, so he knew too much. He initiated contact with Rivera, handed her the USB. The man in the middle, a tall figure with gray hair and a pinched expression, tapped his pen slowly on a leather folder. The nameplate in front of him read, Deputy Director Haver, NSIA. Then, this is a containment emergency. Another agent leaned forward. Do we reactivate chamber network? No, Havar said. Not yet. We can't afford more. Noise. But we need to know what she's seen and what she's planning. He glanced at the security monitor. A blinking red square pulsed beneath the image of Madi's face. Rivera is a journalist, he said. She doesn't just chase stories. She makes people believe them. In Baltimore, Madi finally reached her contact. Thomas Vale, once a respected investigative producer, now semi-retired, lived in a brick apartment behind a shuttered record shop. His place smelled of old wood and reel tape. He opened the door, blinking. "Madi," he whispered. "What the hell? I've got 1980s CIA film scripts, disinformation campaigns, secret agency no one is supposed to know exists. A file that could burn half the intelligence community to the ground." Tom didn't laugh. He just stepped aside. "Come in." They locked every door, turned off every smart device. Then she handed him the USB. Tom had a machine built before the internet, a clunky desktop with a boxy monitor and green-tinted screen. He loaded the drive and began pulling open folders. There were documents marked cultural narrative calibration, empathy, conditioning trials, and public behavior through film influence. At the center was a file marked Classified Project March V Final. It was a video. Madi and Tom sat silently as it played. The screen showed a black and white room. Several men seated around a small stage. A young actor performed a monologue, intense, emotional, and political. It was Denzel Washington, young, early 20s. Then a cut. A meeting room. A government official spoke directly to the camera. "We have found our conduit." His delivery, tone, and control over emotional frequency matched the profile for maximum impact. His presence on screen reduces anxiety, encourages compliance, and raises retention of state-guided narrative threads by over 60%. Subject codename, Shepard. Madi's hands started shaking. "They didn't just use Hollywood to shape minds," Tom said. "They trained Hollywood." The video continued. Project March, Phase 2. Subject, unaware of embedded lines. Key phrases will be delivered in scripts via covert studio routes, triggering influence cycles in major media markets. Activation will be silent. It ended with one sentence on screen. "Art can shape nations. That is why it must be weaponized first." Tom leaned back, stunned. "So the question is, did Denzel ever find out?" Madi was already scanning the screen again. He must have. That's why Edwardson mentioned that silent March line. The generator hummed weakly as Tom lit a candle in the dark apartment. Madi sat frozen beside the unplugged monitor, the silence wrapping around them like fog. No sirens, no footsteps, just tension in the air that made even the candle flicker unevenly. "We're being watched," Tom whispered. The moment he said silent marches bring order on air, that was a trigger. Madi looked up. "We saw it before it happened, which means they know we're ahead." Tom nodded. "And that's what makes us dangerous." Madi opened her bag and pulled out the printed stills from the leaked NSIA video. The government official, the actor data files, Denzel's test footage. She handed one to Tom. "They used him without his knowledge," she said. "He thought he was acting. They were programming." Tom leaned in. "And the real story. It's what happens when the actor finds out." Just then, the landline phone rang. Madi and Tom stared at it, neither moving. Ring, ring, ring. Finally, Tom picked it up. A voice spoke calmly. "Get her to the train station. Track 5. She has 13 minutes. Who is this?" "An old student of Edwardson's," the voice replied. "And a friend of the man who stopped acting and started watching." The line went dead. Madi was already packing. "We don't have time to second guess. This is Edwardson's network. We need to follow it." 15 minutes later, Tom's old car pulled into the back entrance of Baltimore Central Station. Madi had pulled a hoodie over her head and carried only a single flash drive. The train yard was nearly empty at this hour. A cold mist rolled over the tracks. Lights flickered above, painting everything in a dull yellow haze. She ran toward Track 5. Scanning the shadows. A figure waited by the maintenance ladder. It was Denzel Washington. Older, wiser, with a stillness that made the chaos feel even louder. He wore no disguise, no hat. Just a long coat and a look in his eyes that said he'd been expecting her. Maudie stopped. "I didn't know if you were real anymore." "I didn't know either," he said, "until Edwardson sent you." She held out the flash drive. "There. Trying to bring the project back. They're using media again. And you were the blueprint." Denzel didn't take the drive. He looked past it, straight at her. "They never stopped, Maudie. They just went quiet. You know why my roles changed in the last decade? Why I left public interviews? It's because I saw the old scripts again. New actors, new tools, but the same ghost fingerprints." He stepped closer, his voice low. The goal was never influence. It was submission. Quiet minds. Predictable choices. Films that didn't challenge. Stories that shaped obedience. Maudie looked down. J.D. Vance's speech ... was designed. "He's a vessel," Denzel said. "It's the mouthpiece for a system that's trying to reboot its most dangerous. Software, controlled storylines. Directed nationalism, civil calm through emotional pacing. And it's working." Suddenly, a loudspeaker echoed across the platform. "Security sweep initiating. Please exit the area." Denzel glanced up. "We have 3 minutes." Finally, took the flash drive. "I don't need this to expose them," he said. "I need this to warn the others. There are others." Maudie asked, actors, directors, journalists. Some knew, some suspected. But now we bring them together. Maudie hesitated. "You go public, they'll ruin you." He smiled. "Slightly. They tried once. But I'm not the man I was in 1986. I've learned how to tell a story even when I'm not the one speaking." They moved quickly down the ladder, to a side tunnel that fed into an old communications bunker abandoned since the Cold War. Inside, dim lights flickered on as Denzel flipped a breaker. The walls were lined with file cabinets, dusty monitors, and equipment so old it was nearly invisible to modern surveillance. He turned to her. "Every generation gets tested," he said. "Some get wars, some get plagues. We got narrative control. People don't fight back when they think the script is theirs." Maudie looked around the room. "So what do we do?" Denzel opened a metal case and pulled out an old 16mm reel. The title label read, "Silent March Uncut." The studio never released this version. Too raw, too revealing. He loaded it into a portable projector. As it played, Maudie saw something different from the version she remembered. Scenes where lines had been cut. A closing monologue that spoke directly into the camera. "If someday you forget who told you what to believe, ask yourself who profits from your silence." It ended with one frame. Black screen, white words, "Shepherd no more." Maudie sat down, heart racing. "This was your message." And they buried it. Denzel turned to her. "No more burying. It's time we start leaking." Outside, distant sirens began to wail. He handed her a copy of the reel. "You get this too, Tom. He'll know where to drop it. Then disappear. We'll meet again when the next signal hits." "What's the signal?" He paused, then answered. "When a government official references unity with the words emotional equilibrium, that's the new phrase. That's when Phase 4 begins. And what about you?" He smiled again, this time without sadness. "I'll be watching." As Maudie slipped out into the shadows of the city, reel in her bag and fire in her veins, she knew the next part of the story wasn't just about exposing secrets. It was about rewriting the ending. The rain had started by the time Maudie reached the Safe Drop Sonan old newspaper distribution warehouse on the edge of D.C., long forgotten, mostly hollowed out by real estate speculation and time. She parked in a narrow alley behind the building. Headlights off, windshield fogging up from her breath. Inside her coat was the reel Denzel had given her. She hadn't slept since the night of the train station. Every word Denzel said replayed in her mind. People don't fight back when they think the script is theirs. That sentence hit harder. The more she looked at the media headlines that day-controlled stories. Silenced uprisings, performances pretending to be news. Tom was already waiting. He'd set up a field projector and a security sweep scanner inside the warehouse. Maddie stepped into the circle of yellow light, soaked but determined. "You made it," Tom said. "Barely," Maddie replied. She handed him the reel. Silent March, the uncut version. Tom stared at the label for a moment. "I thought this was destroyed." "Was," she said, "but Denzel kept a copy. Hidden since 1987. Now he wants it out." Tom loaded the reel into the projector. The sound of clicking celluloid filled the room. As the film played, grainy images revealed everything. Scenes where Denzel's character spoke not to other characters, but directly into the lens. Warnings about compliance, language that mirrored Cold War surveillance doctrine. Even a coded monologue about narrative paralysis, a term now buried in declassified CIA psychological warfare files. "This isn't a film," Tom whispered. "It's a confession, wrapped in fiction." Maddie nodded. "He told me Phase 4 begins when someone in power says emotional equilibrium." Tom turned toward her. "Did you see the morning press briefing?" "No, why?" He pulled up the video on his laptop. The Secretary of National Communication stood in front of a podium. Her voice was calm, her smile practiced. She was responding to a reporter's question about media division. "We're encouraging platforms to promote emotional equilibrium. Viewers need stability, not more chaos." Maddie's stomach dropped. It started. Tom moved quickly. "Don't leak the reel on YouTube or Twitter. It'll be flagged and drowned in noise. We go old school film festivals, archives, underground cinema circles. Let truth bleed into culture without them knowing what hit them." "Analog rebellion," Maddie said. "Exactly. I made 5 copies on reel, DVD, and encrypted drives. Each one wrapped in old newspaper and taped into envelopes with false return addresses." As Tom sealed the last package, Maddie glanced at the wall. A dusty, torn newspaper clipping from 1991 hung there, an old black and white photo of Edwardson and Denzel at a Columbia guest lecture. The headline read, "The Ethics of Performance. When acting tells truths, politicians won't." "Do you think Edwardson's still alive?" she asked. Tom hesitated. "If he is, he's not above ground." Just then, Tom's satellite radio buzzed. It was a direct encrypted ping. He opened it text only. "FROM. Gideon, MSG. The shepherd has left the pen. All eyes to Capitol Broadcast." 8 p.m. Tom froze. "Gideon is Edwardson's old call sign," he said. "This means he's alive, and he's about to make contact." Maddie stepped forward. "Capitol Broadcast. Isn't that the president's live address tonight?" Tom nodded. "He's hijacking it." They didn't wait. Within minutes, they were back on the road, driving toward the Capitol Media Complex. At the center of Washington, the massive building housed live feeds, uplinks, and government-approved broadcast equipment. It was impossible to get into unless someone inside wanted you there. At 7:42 p.m., they parked in a shadowed alley. Tom pulled 2 press passes from his glove box, old but real. He handed one to Maddie. "We pretend we're technical staff." "How are we getting in?" Tom smiled. "Because someone's letting us in." Sure enough, just inside the side entrance, a man in janitor's uniform stood with a clipboard. He gave them one look and nodded, unlocking the maintenance hallway without a word. Inside, the air was cold and buzzing with electricity. Red lights blinked above doorways. Camera feeds scrawled on monitors showing every senator's face, every news anchor rehearsing. At 7:59 p.m., the main feed locked in. All channels were about to broadcast the president's remarks on national unity, But then static. The screen flickered. The morning after the Capitol broadcast hijack, everything felt different even. The silence in the streets. News anchors wore forced smiles. Commentators spoke in careful, rehearsed tones. Social media was on fire with hashtags like #SilentMarchLeak, #EdwardsonReturns, and #TheRealIsReal. But the real war wasn't happening online. It was happening in the background inside think tanks, encrypted servers, government halls where questions were now being asked no one dared to answer. Madi stood in the dim back room of a local bookstore in Baltimore, watching the footage again. No one had taken down the leak yet. Thousands had already mirrored the 3-minute Edwardson clip. But what mattered most wasn't the footage. It was what people felt when they watched it. It didn't feel like a conspiracy, said someone beside her. It felt like someone finally told the truth. She looked over. A man in his early 30s. Hoodie, sharp eyes. One of the digital curators for a shadow network of ex-journalists and archivists. They called themselves the Afterline. They didn't publish. They preserved. He handed Madi a drive. 5 more copies. International press this time won 4. Al Jazeera won for a journalist in Norway, 3 going offline. She nodded. What about Denzel? The man's expression darkened. No one knows. Disappeared the night of the broadcast. But there's a rumor one of our people caught an encrypted voice ping from an old decommissioned Navy relay. Said 6 words. Kaylee leaned in. The curtain fell. The actor stayed. She said nothing. Only tightened her hand around the drive. At Langley, the CIA's Psychological Operations Division was in panic mode. In a soundproof vault known as Room 46. Senior analysts were staring at a digital map covered in red pulses, indicators of spontaneous protest gatherings. Anonymous tip leaks, classroom debates, even military resignations in scattered locations. What are we looking at? Asked the deputy director. An ignition, not a full uprising, but a breach in belief. This is worse than a leak, the analyst replied. It's a shift. Back in D.C., Tom had reconnected with a former contact, Chelina. A former GRU disinformation expert now living quietly under political asylum. She had seen it all before, just in a different language. Soviet propaganda, East Berlin conditioning. Now American optics, perfected for digital minds. The Silent March was never just a film, she told him. It was a behavioral test. Tom sat across from her, stunned. Test for what? To see how far a society will follow a fiction if it's wrapped in hope, fear, or national. Pride, Denzel's character in the film, that was never a character. It was a role built with state input to guide cultural thought under the illusion of freedom. So he was an agent. No, she said quietly. He was something worse. A believer. Tom exhaled, and now he's awake. And so are others. That evening, Madi met Tom near the Potomac. It was raining again like the night it all began. People are talking, she said, but not in anger. It's in awareness. He handed her a packet trail paper, real ink. It was a dossier titled Operation Ghost Script Classified Level, Former Omega Clearance Status Deactivated. 1995 subject. Psychological Anchoring Through Media Personalities. 1984 to 1993, inside were pages of names, directives and transcripts from meetings between entertainment moguls and intelligence officials. Denzel Washington was listed not as an agent, but as a monitored variable. One whose personal ethics had conflicted with the intended direction, hence the containment strategy. Madi flipped to the last page. A simple note scribbled by Edwardson. He stayed in the role because no one else could, and now he's ending it. Suddenly, Madi's burner phone buzzed. No caller ID, she answered. A familiar voice. Calm, deep, slight rasp. A tone. Follow me. Follow what I left behind. It was Denzel. The line went dead. She stood frozen, the sound of the Potomac crashing behind her. Later that week, an independent film festival in Berlin suddenly announced a secret screening. No title, no director name, it's just one tagline. Not a punchline, a process. People lined up for hours. When the film began, the screen showed nothing for the first minute. Then, slowly, the face of Denzel Washington appeared, not acting, not performing, just speaking into the lens. You've been watching me for decades. But what if I told you that watching was the point? That while you studied the actor, you missed the script handed to you. For 45 minutes, the film exposed scenes, transcripts, buried footage, and personal journal entries. Not fiction, not conspiracy, just evidence. Truth not shouted, but revealed. When the screen faded to black, the words appeared. The narrative is broken. You are free to question it. There was no applause, only silence. The kind that follows after something too big to process hits you all at once. Across continents, the message spread. Quietly, steadily. Edwardson was never seen again. The president never addressed the leak. The agency files stayed classified, but journalists and professors began quoting Denzel's final speech. Back in the U.S., Mahdi walked past a bookstore where Silent March now sat in a new edition on the front display. Next to it, a new memoir. The Curtain Fell by Someone Who Stayed. There was no author photo, just a black cover and a line on the back. If you're still watching, ask yourself who's writing the story. The world didn't change in one night. But it had started. And it all began when one man didn't react with anger. He just smiled, silently, and waited for the rest of the world to catch up.